Bienvenidos a Tres Respuestas, un espacio de conversación, de discusión y de propuestas. Nuestro invitado de hoy es el profesor de la Universidad de Oxford, Michael Woodridge, una de las mentes más prestigiosas del mundo en temas de tecnología, de computación y sobre todo de inteligencia artificial. Es autor de varios libros, ha participado en la elaboración de reportes muy importantes y muy influyentes y es quizás una de las voces más autorizadas para hablar sobre el presente y el futuro de la inteligencia artificial. Professor Woodridge, such an honor to have you in Colombia, to have you here at the Innovation for Development Foundation, and thank you for all your contribution on AI, technology, and computing.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a delight to be here.
Well, let me begin with a personal question. I regularly ask that to our guests in this podcast. Who is Michael Woodridge? How would you define yourself? And tell us about why you have such a passion for technology, for computer science, and why this has been your greatest motivation in life.
So I come from a very ordinary British family. My parents weren't educated beyond the age of 14. They both left school when they were 14, which was the earliest that you used to be able to leave school. Neither of them had a degree, but they were both very hard-working, passionate believers in doing their duty, to bringing up their children, to raising their children properly. And I grew up, became a teenager at a time when the first home computers became possible. I was in my home city of Hereford, which is a country town in England, meeting some friends, and one of my friends told me, and this is April 1980, one of my friends told me, this local shop is selling computers. And I thought this sounded crazy because computers at the time, these were tens of millions of pounds, and it sounded crazy that a shop in this rural town of Hereford would be selling computers. But we went there, and this shop, sure enough, was selling home computers. And we talked to the guys in the shop, and these guys in the shop let us start playing on these computers, and I taught myself to program, literally sitting in the window of this shop. I taught myself to program on these home computers. And so I was that first generation that got to experience home computers, and I just fell in love with computing. And I knew that that was what I wanted to do. But as a student, when I studied computing for my undergraduate degree, I discovered artificial intelligence. And this is nearly 40 years ago. There were so many unsolved problems. There were so many really big questions that nobody had looked at. And I found this just absolutely fascinating, the idea that there was just huge amounts of territory where you could be the only person working in that territory. And I just fell for artificial intelligence. And I was very happily studied artificial intelligence since then. But I have to tell you, for most of that time, artificial intelligence was a backwater. Most people weren't really interested in AI. It's really just over the last few years that AI has taken off. And my life has changed dramatically in the last 5 years as a consequence of that. But it all started by me just becoming fascinated with computers and then realizing in AI there were just so many big questions that you could think about and look at, and I just found that absolutely fascinating.
Well, I think that story, it's not only inspiring by itself, but it's also motivating. And I have to also ask you about that passion for AI has been also combined with the fact that you have done something for the good of society, which is making AI accessible. Last time that we spoke in Oxford University, you gave me your latest book, which is a very succinct explanation of the evolution of AI. Something that is very complex, you have made it accessible. And maybe for many of the people who are listening to us, how would you define what AI is? Because maybe people believe it's something super complex that could change the course of humanity. Other people believe that it could be the greatest tool that has ever existed in order to make the human brain and the human perspective something more efficient, productive, and maybe impactful. So how would you define AI, Mike?
Well, it might be easier to say what AI isn't, or at least what most AI researchers aren't actually trying to do, and that's the Hollywood version of AI. So we've all seen movies and read books and watched TV shows that portray a very compelling idea of AI. Usually there is some big, powerful robot, with bad ideas about what it wants to happen to humanity. This idea of AI that's as fully capable as human beings are, that can do anything that a human being could do, and maybe do things much, much better. And that Hollywood version of AI, which makes for great movies, most famously the Terminator movies, which I love as much as anybody does, but they are science fiction. And actually that's not what drives most AI researchers. What most AI researchers are trying to do is to build machines that can do things which currently only human beings can do. So a classic example of the moment is just driving a car. And this is a really interesting example because we don't think of driving a car as being something that requires intelligence. If somebody tells you, I passed my driving test, we don't think, wow, you must be really clever. That's not the way it works. But yet, driving a car turns out to be really difficult for computers. So those are the kinds of problems that we work on in AI. Getting computers to do things like being able to recognize tumors on an X-ray scan, to recognize cancerous tumors. And at the moment, you require highly paid professionals, highly skilled professionals to do that. And roughly speaking, there aren't enough of those professionals in the world that we would like. How about we build AI that could do that? How about we build AI that could do the endless tasks that perhaps don't really require human intelligence, and free human beings up to do the things that actually require human beings, the things that are fulfilling and useful for human beings to do. That's where the real interest for me in AI is.
And I think that's a great definition. And we were to think what's the raw material that AI requires in order to be successful, it comes to the concept of data.
Absolutely.
And how good quality is the data, how well cured is the data. And that takes me to my next question. How can we ensure that AI can be filled with the right data, and what would be the odds that we could face if we don't have the right data?
Yeah. So it's worth emphasizing this point about data because it is so often misunderstood. I'll give you an example of a colleague in Oxford, a colleague who's a cardiologist, a heart specialist in Oxford. And he's the kind of specialist, if you have heart pains, your doctor will send you to meet him and he'll put you on a treadmill and get you to do a stress test to get you to do exercise. And while you're doing that, he'll do an ultrasound scan of your heart. Now, these ultrasound scans are really difficult for human beings to be able to read and understand. But Paul had the idea more than a decade ago of collecting these heart ultrasound scans labeled with what happened to this person. Did they develop heart disease? Did anything happen to them? Did they die? And so on. These data going forward about them. And then you can use that to what's called train AI programs. You can build AI programs that are able to, using that data, are able to recognize abnormalities on these heart scans. So now you've got AI that's capable of recognizing heart disease just from those ultrasound scans. And Paul's dream is that within a few years, you'll be able to buy an ultrasound scanner that will plug into your smartphone, and you'll be able to get this technology out globally to do an ultrasound scan, upload it, automatically analyze it, and get a diagnosis like that. Now, the reason I tell this story is that the value there, the difficult stuff, is the data. It's not the AI technology itself. All of the value there is in the data. And this is so often the case in AI, where the AI technology is generic and easy to obtain. It's the data that has all the value. So data is absolutely central to AI. No data, no AI. But data about human beings is particularly valuable. And just as human beings that inhabit the modern digital world, if you have a smartwatch and a smartphone, every time you walk around the streets, you radiate data about yourself. You literally radiate data about yourself. And that data is valuable. That data has value. Every time you make an online purchase, whatever your online shop is, you're providing data about your preferences. Every time you're reading a social media feed about a movie or a TV show or a politician and you click a like, you're providing training data for AI so that AI can understand you better. Now, all of that data has value, just like in the ultrasound scan example that I told you earlier, but there are plenty of opportunities for it to be abused. And I say, just inhabiting the modern digital world, you radiate data, and you need to be aware that that's what you're doing. Instead of just clicking, yes, I'll accept all the cookies the next time you go on a website, maybe think about rejecting all the cookies, because if you don't, what you're going to be doing is providing data about yourself. Every online click that you make is giving training data to the machine learning algorithms of big tech companies. And that can be a very powerful thing. It enables them to understand us better, to be able to tailor their products for our use, but sometimes that can reveal things about ourselves that maybe we don't want to reveal.
How do you think the world can improve the quality of the data that it's feeding the AI technologies, especially in order to prevent serious abuse of AI? And you were describing how the internet can capture so much information about ourselves, but then the question is, what happens if all that information is centralized with an unethical purpose, which can be driven to influence the way you vote, the way you decide, the way you can be persuaded to consume X, Y, or Z product? How can we put those ethical boundaries without hyper-regulating something that requires a lot of freedom to evolve?
So you've put your finger on one of the really big challenges around AI regulation of the modern age. This is the question that everybody is asking at the moment. How do you find that happy medium which allows you to get the benefits of AI but also protects your rights as a private individual? Now, I have to tell you, at the moment, we haven't found that happy medium. We don't know where that is. I do think it's important that social media companies play their role. It's a really important role that they have to respect the data that we provide, to be transparent about the data that they have about us, and how that data is used. I think all of that is important. But I think also educating ourselves about the fact that every time you purchase something online, you're providing information about yourself. Every time you click like on a social media, you need to be aware of what you're doing. Every time you upload a picture of yourself onto social media and you label it with your name, what you're doing is providing training data. And one thing that many of your readers might not be aware of, particularly older readers, they might be thinking, older listeners, they might be thinking, well, I'm not on social media, I don't do Twitter or X. Yeah, but your kids are. And your kid, you remember that barbecue you were at last summer where you were holding a glass of wine while your kids took a picture? They uploaded it to Instagram or whatever it is that teenagers use these. You are in the training data. So educating ourselves around that and being aware of that, I think, is really important. But the truth is, at the moment, we haven't found what that happy medium is that allows us to get the benefits of AI while respecting our rights as private individuals. And it's going to be a work in progress to get there over the years ahead. But it has to start, I think, with social media companies in particular.
If we were to think about the best uses that we could give to AI, I would love to ask what are your reflections on which sectors are going to receive the highest benefit of this? Some people have said that maybe with the evolution of AI, at the speed of evolution, maybe in the medical sector we can find cure to certain kinds of cancer within the next decade or less. Other people have said maybe some of the dead languages that we had from the ancient world can be decodified, and we can basically win lots of centuries that we have lost not being able to summarize or grasp the essence of many of those thoughts. Other people say if we combine AI capacity to read significant amount of images, to use satellite technology to face some of the climate challenges we face, we would also have a tremendous benefit. So what, in your opinions, are those sectors that will be the biggest beneficiaries of the AI revolution?
So the number one has to be healthcare, and in many different ways. So just to give you an example, I'm wearing an Apple Watch, a smartwatch, and this is This is more or less first-generation technology. These haven't been around for very long, but they're already equipped with ECG scanners and scanners that can detect your blood sugar levels and things like that. Fast forward 20 years and imagine what this technology is going to be able to do. For the first time in human history, we're going to be able to monitor the health, the physiology of human beings constantly. Now, they're going to provide a stream of data about us. That raises some concerns that we need to think about. But nevertheless, what that's going to do is raise the possibility of spotting the onset of stress, spotting the onset of heart disease, spotting the onset of potentially even dementia, long before they would otherwise be spotted. So I have colleagues who seriously believe that they are going to be able to detect dementia, which is a terrible, terrible disease. Both my parents died of dementia, and it was a horrible thing to watch, and I'm sure many of your listeners have been through the same experience. It's one of the most horrible diseases in the modern age. But the earlier we can spot the onset of dementia, the more we can do to mitigate it, and the more care we can take. So imagine this, AI spotting the onset of dementia just by the way that you use your smartphone. Because one of the characteristics of dementia is that routine tasks, people with dementia suddenly start to slow down on those tasks and get confused. You know, just finding a contact from a contact list on your phone, people with dementia will be much slower about using that. So imagine that we're able to give those early warning signals. Imagine that we're able to have AI health advisors that can tell us, look, do you realize that you're actually very stressed? You know, this last week you haven't slept well, your blood sugar levels have been terrible, you know, your heart rate has been really unhealthy, you need to take some time out to rest. Imagine the health benefits that that's going to bring globally. Now, some people respond to that and say, but I don't want an AI doctor, I want a human doctor. I have to say that's a very first world perspective. For a lot of people, I think, for an enormous number of people globally, it's going to be an AI doctor or nothing. And I think the global benefits of that, and we could talk for hours just about how AI is going to be used for healthcare, but the global benefits of that will be massive. So that is one example, and it really promises to be transformative. Another area is science. So just a few weeks ago, we heard Nobel Prizes in physics and in chemistry going to AI researchers. And the Nobel Prize in chemistry went to a team from the London-based DeepMind company who developed a program that does protein folding structure prediction. Now, this is kind of an obscure thing for most of us to have to grapple with, but it's a really fundamental scientific problem that's encountered time and time again. And solving this problem previously would take months. Now, a student can do this in 30 minutes. What is the upshot of that? The time scale for developing drugs to treat illnesses and so on is going to collapse. We're going to be able to do that much more quickly. A new disease arrives, as we saw happen just a few years ago, and of course it will happen again, there's no doubt about that. Our ability to respond to that is going to be much, much, much more agile. We're going to be able to respond much more quickly because AI is going to help us in the development of those drugs. So scientific development is going to accelerate. And from where I sit in Oxford, you know, I talk to colleagues in chemistry, in biology, in physics. It's a transformative moment for them, the arrival of large-scale AI. It's allowing them to do science that they just couldn't have imagined before. And we were talking about data a few moments ago. If they've got a data set, what can AI do with this data that I've got? Whether you're looking at exoplanets, you know, planets surrounding another star system, or whether you're looking at cells, human cells under a microscope, all of science is about data now, and AI is revolutionizing that. So that, I think, AI and science we're already seeing a revolution there. And the upshot of that is science is going to accelerate very, very quickly. But let me give you just one really mundane example. So, I mean, I'm edging closer to retirement, and I'm beginning to think, am I, making sure that my affairs are in order for retirement, that I have a comfortable retirement, that I've made appropriate plans. I have no clue about finances. Nobody's ever explained pensions to me or how they work, these kind of things. Imagine we have an AI advisor that can just help us plan our lives, can help us manage our finances, just maybe help us do that a little bit better, that can help us make wise decisions rather than rash decisions around about the mortgages we get to buy a house or pension planning. With an aging population in the UK, the provision of pensions and so on is a huge issue. But imagine you've just got AI that's helping you plan your life, a wise assistant that's helping you to make the right decisions, the right financial decisions and so on, that's able to give you impartial, honest advice about, whether when you're looking at different kinds of loans, is able to tell you what the benefits of these, which is the best fit, without trying to sell your product, just actually helping you to make, just like you have a wise uncle or aunt who's able to give you that advice. Now, I wish most of us had a wise uncle or aunt, but actually the truth is most of us don't. And I suspect, like many of your listeners, I've kind of just tumbled through life without any clear guiding vision for where I'm going, and it's mostly worked out okay. But nevertheless, I'm sure I could have managed my finances and my life, that kind of aspect of my life, a lot better than I actually did. So imagine if we have AI to do that, just to make us smarter when we live our lives. And again, this is not science fiction. I think this is a very realistic prospect.
Let me also talk about the odds. Let me talk about the threats. Let me talk about what scares people. We have seen, for example, how through social media, there can be a lot of information being gathered, but at the same time, we see a lot of information being manipulated from those who abuse and those who can program algorithms to deploy massive amount of disinformation that can harm many of the democracies around the world. And obviously, people have the debate whether there needs to be more regulation or if we could have maybe more than regulation, some boundaries that can, from an ethical perspective, determine how do we use AI. But are you worried about any potential misuse or manipulation of that information gathered that can be aimed to massively create incompatible information, maybe with democracy, or that can infuriate society? And if that is something that keeps you awake, what do you think we can do as societies to tackle that challenge?
So I remember when we met in Oxford earlier in the year, we talked about this at some length, I think, and at that point we were looking at elections in India, the world's largest democracy, in the US, probably the most consequential elections in the world, but also for us in the UK. And I said at the time that one of my really big fears about AI was that we would see AI being mobilized by unscrupulous actors, potentially state-level actors, nation-states, who had an interest in disrupting democratic processes. Or even just, some teenager who's just doing it because they think it's funny to do this, in the way that teenagers do sometimes. And I was really worried that what we would see on social media platforms was a massive campaign of just fake news. And the worry was that we just wouldn't know where to look anymore. We would have no clue what was true and what wasn't. We would be drowning in disinformation. There was even talk in the UK about having public information campaigns by the government, about the government telling people, look, be wary of what you see on social media. You shouldn't trust everything that you see. Now, we did see some examples, but nothing like the scale that we feared. So I think in some sense we dodged that bullet, for the moment anyway. But here is a prediction. Within 10 years, 20 years at the most, basically all of the media that we encounter on social media, all of the texts that we read, all of the stories that we listen to will be AI generated. It just feels inevitable that that's the way that things are going. We will see the generation of news being completely transformed by AI, where we have AI-generated news feed, which, for example, in the UK Parliament, which is televised, where stories are just automatically generated in real time based on the events that are going on there. We'll have automatic news aggregators putting together stories from all across the globe and generating content in real time. We will see an enormous multiplication of the amount of content there. There will be a lot more of it. Almost all of it will be AI generated. And at that point, where do we look? And my guess is we will still be able to get human generated content, but the way these things go, we'll have to pay for it. You want premium content that's human generated, you will have to pay for it. Trusted news sources will become incredibly important. But honestly, the number of trusted news sources in the world has declined rather than expanded in the last few years, it seems. But they will have an enormously important role to play because we will need to know who do we trust amongst these endless voices that are speaking to us. And that, I think, I'm normally very reluctant to make predictions, but this just feels inevitable. And we can revisit this in 10 or 20 years. But I think 10 years, probably 20 years at the most, basically all the content we encounter is going to be AI generated. Now, what can we do personally to mitigate those risks? It's about educating ourselves. It's not about doing your own research, because doing your own research can sometimes take you down the crazy rabbit hole of extremists and conspiracy theories and so on. But again, being able to question what we're looking at, to go to trusted sources and check stories on trusted sources to make sure that they are verified. And this is going to be a challenge for all of us because we're not very good, actually, I think, human beings at questioning what we see. We do tend to take things for granted, particularly when it reinforces a stereotype that we already had, a prejudice that we already had. So a lot of education, I think, is going to be required in the years ahead. But again, I think social media companies have an important role here.
So let me also mention about the challenge for intellectual property, that it has become a marvelous debate. But also, let me put it from an academic perspective, because I've had some conversations with professors from different universities, and I remember a conversation I had with this great professor who said, for many of my interviews that I have to respond on the field of knowledge in which I am devoted to, I have used AI to prepare some of the responses based on my own research. Other professors that work on areas where they have been doing the same research for the last 10 years, just because, sometimes the research is evolving. They said, well, I've used AI for many of the papers that I have to co-write with other professors from other parts, just because I don't have new developments. And my question to you is it ethical to do that? And if it's not ethical, at some point, based on what you said, there's going to be so much knowledge and so much understanding on the way we think that I don't know if the conventional idea of how do we write a paper or how do we defend our own creations can be just multiplied by the fact that AI knows so much about us.
Well, I think for creative professionals, people who make a living by creating content for whatever form that takes, then the rise of AI has presented, generative AI, the AI of ChatGPT and the like, has presented a really new challenge. So let me give you an example to illustrate this. So J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter books, she famously spent sort of a few years in Edinburgh without a job, just working, slaving away to create the Harry Potter universe. She finally gets a publisher for her book, and it's a smash hit, becomes a smash hit. And of course, she goes on to have a string of enormously successful books, all based in the universe that she spent years creating. But now imagine that a modern day J.K. Rowling publishes a book like that, and the next week, social media, the internet is just full of faithful duplications, capturing that universe perfectly. Or the Beatles famously spending years in Hamburg playing gigs 12 hours a day, but creating the unique Beatles sound that revolutionized music in the 1960s. Imagine they released their first album, and the next day the internet is just full of faithful recreations of the Lennon and McCartney sound and the Ringo Starr drumming and all the rest of it. That's their intellectual property, that's their livelihood. That unique voice is their livelihood. And generative AI threatens that. Now, I don't think artists like at the level of the Beatles or J.K. Rowling and so on, I don't see any great risks to them at the moment. But where I do see risks is a huge number of people that are creative professionals but are not necessarily at the same level. So imagine I'm running an Italian restaurant and I want to set up a website. The way that I do that in a moment is I hire somebody to generate the copy, the text that's going to go on that website. And it's creative, but it's fairly routine to create that text. And enormous numbers of people make a living doing that. And probably a lot of those people are actually writing novels in their spare time while they're actually making their money by writing the routine copy that goes onto restaurant websites. ChatGPT and the like can just do that. Actually, they won't just generate the copy, they'll generate the entire website for you. So we're already seeing examples of those people having their livelihoods affected by generative AI. And one quite sad aspect of that is that the economy that was created around that work enabled people in, for example, in the Philippines to make a living by generating copy for people like me on the other side of the world. And the World Wide Web just enabled them to do that. And it was a good living for them, and it was a reasonable price for me. Everybody was happy in that transaction. But now, ChatGPT just does it. And we're beginning to see the signs of those kind of roles being affected. So what to make of that is difficult. I think the really high-level creatives, the novelists, the filmmakers, the musicians, I think are safe for the time being. But there are an awful lot of other people who think whose roles are going to be affected by this.
And how do you think we can, as humans, to combine the emerging influence of AI with not losing our human intelligence? And the reason why I say this is because as much as we see all these great innovations from AI, we also see a world in where so many places have been captured by hatred, by polarization, by post-truth, and actually we're seeing lots of conflicts in the world, maybe the largest amount of conflicts in the last 10 years. So how can we combine that massive, impressive, and always inspiring evolution of technology in which machines can learn and can apply knowledge, and at the same time, how are we losing so fast sometimes the possibility of being capable of bridging divides and creating consensus?
So I think there's two things to say. I think firstly, we should all be aware that AI is a tool. It is just a tool that we use. It's like a web browser or an email program like Outlook or a spreadsheet. It's a very powerful tool, but it's just a tool. But the second thing to say is that if we get it right, then it's a tool that frees us up to do the things that require humans to do them, to do the things that require uniquely human skills. So I'll give you an example. One of the aspects of AI that's been discussed an awful lot over the last few years is AI in education. Will AI replace teachers? Well, not on a large scale, I think, because teachers do one of the most fundamentally human things. They understand children. They're not just standing at the front of a class and talking to a class. They're understanding their children. They're able to relate to their children, to understand what their individual children are good at, what they're not good at, what their interests are, how to get the most out of those children, how to help them, to guide them into the kind of roles that are going to enable them to be productive and happy. That's what a teacher does. It's a very human set of skills. And so, for example, I don't think teachers is a profession that I would be concerned about. It's a uniquely human profession. Doctors, I think doctors will be using AI as a tool in the way that we've already described, and I'm really, really excited about that. But doctors don't just make diagnoses and say, here, take those pills. They understand you. When you go and talk to a doctor, the doctor understands you as a human being. And they think about what is best for the human being that I'm looking at now. They understand you on a human level. It's a uniquely human set of skills that makes a good doctor. Not all doctors have those skills, I have to say, but the good ones have them really, really, really highly tuned. So AI, if we get it right, and it's not guaranteed that we will get it right. If we get AI right, it will free us up to be the human beings and to do the things, to do the jobs that require human beings to do them, to free us up from things that are from drudgery and from dangerous jobs. These are the obvious jobs that we want AI to do, but to free us up for the jobs that are fulfilling as human beings. That's my dream about AI.
Professor Woodridge, we could stay the whole day talking about all this amazing field of technology and AI, but we're running out of time, and I need to ask one last question. If you were to think on our daily lives 10 years from now, how do you think we will be living with AI? I mean, tell me some of the things that you believe will be present in our daily lives and in our daily family style of living using AI.
AI is going to be everywhere. Every time you make a decision, AI will be there helping you make a better decision. If we get AI right, then we won't be its slaves. It will be helping us to live better lives. Every aspect of our lives, from education through to employment, through our relationship with government, through our leisure time, AI will be there absolutely everywhere. It will make us smarter. So the way to think about AI is not that there's going to be a robot in your home that greets you when you come home and answers your questions. AI is going to be in the fabric of our world, everywhere in the fabric of our world. It's going to be embedded in everything that we do. And if we get it right, it's going to be something which is going to help us live smarter, happier, healthier, wealthier lives. The challenge we've got is ensuring that that's the AI future that we get to.
Professor Woodridge, such a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being again in Colombia in our Innovation for Development Foundation, and look forward to hearing from you in the next days, also in our event tomorrow on AI, Angel or Demon. Thank you for being in Bogota.
Thank you. It's an enormous pleasure.